all that you came, because this is an excellent topic. And it's not just because I'm in the area of research myself, but as we all know, research is critical in any aspect of our lives. So with those words, please let me introduce myself. My name is Annie Rogers, and I am the Institutional Development Advisor at Pacific Polytech. And it is really a wonderful pleasure to see you all and for me to be your Master of Ceremony for today. We started our public lectures a quarter ago, so in May, and we are definitely on track because we had said for the start we will do this every quarter, and so exactly one quarter today we are doing our second in our series of public lectures. And again, in the first lecture, we had an excellent academic all the way from Australia, Dr. Sushila Chang, who came and made a presentation. And today we have another very enticing and very intriguing presentation on the role of research in, and it should be civic society, civil society, interchangeable, in development. Okay, so I'm going to be extremely interested. I know my bosses are, and I'm sure everyone here is going to be hanging on every word. As we all know, no government, no country, no household even can move forward without the right direction. Even for things that I do with my children, my plans for my own individual future, and anything that I do has always been research-based. And that's not just because I'm an economist. That's because right from the start, wanting to be in research and wanting to know more and wanting to be able to plan was what led me to seek education in order to become an economist. And that furthered my interest in research. So with those words, we are all eager to get started. So I am going to invite the chair of Pacific Polytech, Dr. Ganesh Chand, to come up and introduce our guest speaker for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Aisake, for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasant duty to introduce Aisake to all of you. Most of you may not have come across this gentleman. Most of you present here. I know some of the old-timers know him very well. But let me go back 20 years ago. Aisake has been one of the most prolific researchers in the country. Consistent. We, as an academic and as a researcher myself, I have seen people claim to be researchers and then they disappear and then they come up and then they disappear. That's not Aisake. Aisake began his research journey from the time I know, the Yukon Medical Center. Kevin Barr was there, Father Kevin Barr. And he continued. He pressed on research as his core responsibility. I'm sorry, I won't go through the details of his achievements, but he has produced some of the best products that are available, research products. I invite you to actually Google his achievements. Either he himself has researched or he has commissioned a lot of research in the country through his organization. What is most interesting about him is that he has been consistent. Aisake, thank you very much for that. Thank you for availing yourself to this occasion. As you know, from your own experience, research has not been a very favorite topic for past almost 2 decades. People are numb to research. I had been in another function this afternoon where there are a lot of academics and many claim to be researchers. So to some of them I asked, so what are you researching now? And they were kind of evading, evading the question, which showed to me that research suffered extensively. Our intent of inviting you, Aisake, was to reignite the passion in research. And I know you can do it because I have followed your research products very closely. He has just launched a book 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. People don't, at one time, book launches were favorite occasions for academics. Now, no longer. People write books quietly, publish them, and then, the books also disappear. Aisake, you are separate, you are unique. You continue to have the public occasions where people can come, interact on the product that is being launched. So there is a lot that we all have to learn from him, but more so today, we want to learn from you on the role of research in civic development and national development. I, at this stage, want to also acknowledge the presence of some very important people, of course, other than management and all. I acknowledge Professor Enkin Swami, one of our earliest academics, also a one-time principal of FIT, and Kim, welcome to this event. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Mahendra Kumar, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Fiji, and many former position holders. Thank you, Mahen, for coming. I am so pleased that there are senior people here, Jonathan Kavula, who also has been consistent, but not so much researching nowadays. So I hope that we will get back into that culture of research and producing products out of research for public discourse. With these words, may I welcome you to start your presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just wanted to say thank you to the chairman, Dr. Ganesh, and his management team for this kind of invitation to be here this afternoon. I felt obligated to do it. It was the last time about when I think it was in October last year, and we were looking for someone. We got someone to do a presentation on the educational trends in the region, because where I am at the moment, which is the Pacific Theological College, is transitioning to a university in 2025, which is next year. And so that person got cold feet in the last minute. And the day before the event happened, I sent an urgent message to Ganesh, and so I felt obligated to do this for him. That, okay, so one good turn deserves another. We're talking with Annie, right? Yeah. Early on, and she, while she was sharing with me about her role in Polytech, I said to her, were you one time a hibiscus queen? And she said, well, that was a long time ago. But I can remember the face, huh? Because back then you were ravishing. You're quite a lady. Anyway, So for this afternoon, I thought I don't know the expectation of Ganesh and Polytech, but I thought because you're all familiar with the technical parts of research, right? Methodologies and those things like that. So I will not go into that, but rather I want to situate research in terms of national development. It's nice to see John back there. He's kind of old now, and but I hope his mind still works. So, but I wanted to, why I mentioned Annie is because of this, this is to do with memory. And this came out back in the year 2000. August the 14th was last weekend. Because, you know, the year changes, the date changes all the time when you come in. But this happened, and it's the newspaper quoted this weekend, ethnic Indians and indigenous Fijian families shared food in traditional ceremonies of reconciliation after weeks of pro-rebel protest on the Pacific nation's northern island of Vanuatu. But why I wanted to start off with Annie and remembering the past history of her being a queen in Hibiscus Festival, and this particular quotation is because for three points. One is that nations and communities need identity. And identity needs memory. And memory depends on the stories we tell about ourselves, our children, and our communities. So that is an important aspect of research, is knowing the history, knowing memories, and how memory plays in the national development of a people. And why, in terms of today, when the government has passed the reconciliation bill, it's not necessarily about what happened back then, but instituting within the national memory a characteristic of reconciliation. And regardless of whether there is conflicts and coups in the future, that strength remains. That people come together at a time of strife to be able to tell their stories without fear. Unlike in the past 16 years, where each of us are afraid to tell our stories. So I wanted to start off with that as a way of introduction, that the session today is not necessarily about the technicalities of research. It's how research, and this is all I'm going to talk on one point only, and this is to do with this idea. The strength and character of a nation or a community lies not in numbers, but in contribution. And that's the idea that I want to share with you. Because in research, you delve into aspects of national life that no other aspects or no other spheres of life deal with. You deal with reconciliation, you deal with needs of people, you deal with their social relationships, you deal with the political arrangements of nations. That is research. And if research done well, it contributes. But I wanted to talk more about it. That's just one idea for this afternoon. In three separate ways. One is vision. Research needs visions and frames. Secondly, research needs brains, understand the brain. And the philosophy of words, how to use words. And thirdly, research needs context and to understand the conditions of that research, contact with. Now, this is a quote from Isaac Newton. I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. Those photos, and why I'm going to just talk on just this one idea of that our strength as a nation and community lies in contribution, not on numbers, is that particular idea is drawn from, most communities, indigenous communities, they do fishing, right? And when they do collective fishing, there's a time in the year or the month where they call together for fishing. And they catch the fish and they share it. But it's not so much the sharing of that particular, of the catch of the day. It's more that when people leave from that event, they felt they have contributed something, however small or big that may be. So I wanted to say that, and I'll explain later on as we go, why numbers, if we focus too much on numbers, it becomes dangerous. We focus on contributions, it becomes uplifting. Not only collectively, but individually. I come to realize this when, for almost a year, I was in cane farming community called Karo, just out of Lambasa. You know where that place is. It's outside Nangingi, and then you go north to Nalemba, and you go to the seaside. But I come to recognize the extension of this idea and how important it is that the family with whom I stayed with, the old man's name, he passed on right now, his name is Suren, but his family, and he said there are only 6 households in Karo, all cane farming families, right? And he said that when we begin to count how many we are, we begin to feel disillusioned. But when we begin to count our contributions to our community, we begin to feel empowered. Nations, governments do census every year. And depending on the statistics of a particular census, we always take it politically, right? And I mean, during the last government one, there was a ban on releasing the statistics, because numbers are not necessarily true. So I wanted to say that in the terms of this presentation is to delve on that idea, strength in contribution than numbers. But we look first at visions and frames, and these are 2 quotations. One from, both of them have been part of our political life for years and decades and have shaped the nation since. So, Jairam Reddy, 1993, said, "I offer a vision which sees this beloved land of ours united in its diversity, forged out of its adversity and built on trust. I offer you a vision of Fiji, which historians will say that in the midst of tragedy, we found courage and wisdom and foresight and determination to lead the nation away from the precipice into a prosperous future." Then in 2001, Richoni Manraiuwi said, "It is time to move forward together, stronger for the bitter experiences we have shared, wiser for the suffering inflicted on us, and more compassionate for having the capacity to forgive. For all its faults and cruelties, Fiji remains a country full of promise and hope, simply demonstrated by the goodwill that has endured and the love we have for this land that is our home. Now, I wanted to share those two visions by two of our great leaders who have gone by. And I want to say that that is the vision that should contextualize our research. Those are suggested visions. I'm not talking about scientific research, biology kind of research thing. I'm talking about national, social, political research. It has to do with the foundation and the integrity of a nation. Visions and frames are critical to research. Yeah. So, it went back, right? So, the basic assumption is that to be able to articulate and frame your research work on a particular vision, we all need to have an image of what is a good society look like. What is it? Now, Isaiah Berlin once said that this is in reference to Europe, and he said that Serbia has a lot of geography but less history, whereas Israel has less geography but a whole lot of history. So in terms of Fiji, we have a whole lot of history but less geography. You get what I mean, eh? We have more than 3,000 years of history, and much of the history we don't know. Our history only began in the last 100 years, as far as this current generation is concerned. Eh? But that history is premised on a memory that we have over the past 20, 30 years, have experiences that will build a nation for a long time. And why? Because every time we have a coup, a strife, we come back and contribute. Yeah? Regardless of how many times we complain and say we should do away with the coup culture, and rightly so, we should. But every time there is a coup, every time there is a conflict, we come back stronger with research, with investment, and we contribute. Again, it's not numbers, it's our contribution that makes us strong. Yeah? So imagine research, imagining what is a good society look like. So I had to come of this. It's one that attends to the basic needs of its people. It's also one that has respect for the freedom and encourages the responsibilities of its citizens. One that encourages contributions and innovations with expertise and experiences, and with a hope that all these things will make things better for our people. The good society is the world of living together without differences, our shared values, a world that we create with our words, in the act of mutually promising and obligating ourselves with our words to something much larger than ourselves. One of the difficulties and one of the problems over the years with regards to the Constitution is that we promised a lot of words, but we never obligate ourselves to it. Yeah. We create the world we live in with the words we promise. Now there's another, J.L. Austin an English historian, philosopher. He talked about the concept of performative utterance. And he said that we create reality with the words we use. And a good example is that when a judge hits the gavel and said, we are in court, we are in session, it's actually happening, right? Or when we exchange our vows during marriage, we said, I am, it's actually happened, right? So the world we create is the result of the words we use. Our problem over the years is that we create a constitution, but we never obligate ourselves to it. And especially, not necessarily in terms of the arrangement, the political arrangements within the Constitution, but in terms of the preamble. Yeah? Preamble is one of the most important part of a Constitution. It's a social contract. It's like a married thing, a covenant that we give to ourselves. So, again, citing Johnny said, in terms of good society, institutions of state and civil society provide the support necessary to ensure the building of peaceful, prosperous, and secure societies that are founded on happy families, whether it is by way of taxation relief, financial support, and parental leave, and care and counseling, as well as education and religious backing. So, all I'm trying to say in this slide is that for research, you need to frame your research on the vision of the day, whether it's the government, the national constitutional vision, right? And how can your research contribute towards that vision? How can you frame your research, the questions, or whatever you need to do to be able that the outcomes contribute to the attainment of that vision, or challenge the vision. Yeah? So, how does a good society look like? Neither does market, it is not the creation of the market nor the state. It is made for the moral choices of each of us. We create that good society. It's not the state nor the market. Secondly, the test of a good society is not military, political, economic, or demographic. It is the moral template of that society. That's what makes it a good society. Thirdly, the unique ethic of a constitution places on each of us an immense dual responsibility, both individual and collective. I am responsible for what I do, but I am also responsible for what you do. Our political consciousness haven't come to a stage where we can say to each other, regardless of whether we are of Indian descent, Fijian, ethnic Fijian descent, or Rotuma or Chinese, that yes, I'm responsible for you. And nowhere else in the world have reached that consciousness. But the strength of our experiences over the past 30 years give us that possibility that we can build it. Of coups, political upheavals, and strife. And we have come a long way in that. Fourthly, it is neither the state, the government, or the military or the police that is the primary guarantor of the law. It is us, and all of us together. And the unique ethic of a constitution is covenantal. And that is what is missing in the past. How many constitutions is the idea that we are in covenant with one another. And it's not a religious idea anyway. It has been a long drawn out idea since for what, decades and centuries ago. So each of us separately together make or break society. And a free society is made less by structures than by personal responsibility for the moral template that we create. Now, I'm not saying that in each of us we should have a moral template, but at least in terms of the nation, in national development, there need to be a moral template. We have such things in the constitutions of the past, but we have never attended to the seriousness of what it means to live by a moral template. We argue among the details of the Constitution more than we agree on the moral template. Yeah. And you'll find that the moral template in our Constitution, the preamble and the vision and the objectives of a Constitution. There are some quotations about that we are the guardian of a society, not necessarily the military, the police, or the courts. Freedom is sustained only when we become a moral community. And any moral community achieves a greatness far beyond its numbers as we lift others and they lift us. Here's a quotation from the philosopher Theological. Liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. And George Washington's quote, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And Ratu again, the long-term solution lies in increasing levels of education and in the activities of civil society. They provide a counterweight to the power of the state, and represent the voluntary will of ordinary people, banding them together for a particular purpose. Again, the emphasis on each of us that we do not abscond our responsibility as guardians of that moral template. So there is a slide over the past how many years that we have begun to abscond that responsibility to the state. And we run to the state for everything else. Yeah? And when in fact you and I, civil institutions, education, religious organizations, upon us rests the responsibility, the guardian of our moral template. I talked about the vision and frames, how these are critical for research. The need for research to understand that it has to operate from within a vision and how the research is framed from within that vision. And if we're doing a national research on now that the Constitution is up for discussions, hopefully, how can you do a research on perhaps a new political arrangements for Fiji? What would be that vision look like? Huh? And hopefully the new Attorney General will put again the Constitution into consultations and make it a meaningful one. Huh? But in any case, research needs visions and frames. That's all I'm saying. The second part of this afternoon session is to talk about brains and words. These are my selection of revolutions in world history, but you may have your own. Huh? But for me, the real revolution in civilization are all revolutions in information technology. And there are 6 of them. The first one is to do with the writing, the invention of writing. Yeah. It's about 3,600 years BCE. That was long way back. Okay? But it gives birth to civilizations. The invention of writings gives birth to civilization. But it expands the memory, if you like today is the gigabyte, right? The memory beyond one human being. That memory now can be stored and can be accessed and can be learned because a lot more people have access to writing. Yeah? But it gives birth to civilizations. The second revolution for me is the birth of the alphabet. And I think most of you know this particular history. Around the 650 BCE with the Egyptian. I'll come back to number 2. Number 3 is to do with the codex. When they stop writing things on scrolls and they begin writing books. And that gives birth to to Christianity. Because they do, most of the Christian scribes do their writing in books rather than the scrolls. Used to be the writing material for previous civilizations. And then you have the printing, the invention of the printing. And that's to give birth to the Reformation in European history. And there was a person, John something I forgot, but he wrote things in protest of Rome, but it never got spread. It didn't spread because the printing wasn't invented at the time. By the time the printing was invented, Martin Luther presented his thesis, and Martin Luther's thesis became so popular because of printing, the printing press. Yeah. But it gave birth to the Protestant work ethic and Max Weber and capitalism much, much later. But this is not so much a shaking event in history, but it's the birth of the newspaper. And this book by Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities, and he talks about how the newspaper consequently give birth to the nation state in France and Germany and all that. And of course today you have the global IT, the global communication system. The cartoon on the side, which read that he has a lot of followers on Twitter, but we're the only ones who follow him in real life. Those are the 2 dogs. The point being, in the last revolution, this is the current one that we're living in, we don't know where we are going yet. How will that impact on society as a whole? Now, that is an interesting topic of research, if you like. Yeah. The impact of social media on Fiji's learning environment. So, in terms of that, it's an interesting. But what I'm trying to say in terms of brains and words is that number 2 is the focus of it, the invention of the alphabet. And it started in 450 now, around the same time as writing was invented, the alphabet came into being as well. But the Sumerians, in the language they had the symbols, 450 symbols. The Chinese, the last one was, according to the dictionary for 19-something, I can't remember what it is, 40,000 characters. Now the point is being that when the alphabet is so large, only a few people get to read it and know it. And pretty soon, you create an elite of academics, right? Because only a few know. And then you have an hierarchical society developed, right? Now, that has been the case since the invention of the alphabets until, when was this, the printing press. And the whole knowledge of whole human knowledge reduced to 22 to 26 characters. And now, the possibility that everyone can be literate, women, men, and child. And not only that possibility, but then you can imagine people dreaming about a society where there's equal dignity, right? Because the accessibility of the alphabet for everyone. Sometimes in our own history, we read things and we say to ourselves, well, how relevant is this to us? The point being that if we read history and we begin to discover that there are certain things why we have so much attention to democracy and freedom, because there is a history to it. The alphabet is one of those. Yeah. And so we don't talk about democracy and freedom as if they are the latest invention by the United Nations. No. It goes back centuries and centuries. Now I'll talk about the brain. And this is particularly important for research. This person, Robert Ornstein, wrote a book called The Right Mind, Making Sense of the Hemispheres, the left and the right hemispheres of our brain. But he said that something very, very interesting. And he said that languages who do not have vowels, they write from right to left. For languages that have vowels, they write from left to right, right? And when you begin to write from right to left, you use your right brain, right side of the brain. But when you write from your left to the right, you use your left brain. Now there's a history to this. The Greeks, well, just a footnote to this is that we live in times where we are footnotes of the Greek philosophy, starting from Plato. But the Greeks operate from the left side of the brain, logic, right? The interesting point is that in terms of research, we do analysis and break things down into their atomic particles through our left side of the brain. Yeah? This guy, Robert Ornstein, he's a neurosurgeon, neuroscientist. So he was trying to understand why should the left and the right side work together? They should work together. But they don't work together. Yeah? So he was trying to understand that part of it, and he came to the conclusion that the two things can work together and can if we recognize the function of each side, right? So you have the scientist working operating on the left side of the brain, much more than the right. Then you have the sociologists, those who operate mostly from the right side of the brain. How much more, he said, is that knowledge and science, it deals with how things operate, how things come together, how things work. Science, yeah? And you know that. a word is understood by itself, meaning that languages that have vowels, you can say one word and you know exactly what it means. But a language that does not have vowels, it has to be understood within a sentence, a paragraph. And that's the right side of the brain. You have to place this particular word in the context, right? Now you find that interesting because these are insights for research. In indigenous communities mostly, in ethnic Fijians, or even in those who are steeped in religious thought, they operate from the right side of the brain. And when you say a word, you have to put it into a context. Yeah? A context in which they make meaning out of that word. Take the Constitution, for example. If we are to do a consultation on the Constitution, then the key words and visions of our constitutions need to be put into a context. And that's how our people understand things. The right side of the brain talks about, it's mostly to do with philosophy and religion. And it speaks to the question, why? Why things happen today? Why they do happen every time? Why do coups happen every time? Not every time, but occasionally. So the right side of the brain is good with synthesis, joining things together. So the relevance to research today in terms of the national development is understanding how our society works. Yeah? One side of our society is not necessarily demarcated very neatly, but for most of us, we are trained and educated in a Western way, yeah? Western models of education. And we are, in most sense, are logical and left side brain educated, right? And yet, we all grew up with a religious background, whether it's Christian or Hindu or Muslim, right? And yet, within that religious background, we learn our own philosophies of life, which we should never forget anyway. And so when you come to a context of research, is how do we work these two things together? On one hand, we need the data, the analysis, the breakdown of things. On the other hand, you need the meaning of things. Yeah. Why? Why is the poverty level in this country continues to grow? What is the percentage now? 25, Dr. Ganesh? I've seen some figures that say 35. And so we, in terms of poverty research, inequality research, wages, and all these things, we need to be able to not only tackle the question of how, but also tackle the question why these things are happening. Now, in terms of words, and this is what I referenced earlier, is that we create worlds with our words. We use language to create a fact. Right? Morality is born in the act of promising, and that's Nietzsche. Interesting insight is that we use words to free ourselves. But the very act that I willfully agree to the preamble, I also obligate myself to it. Yeah? So it carries both freedom and obligation. The problem with us over the past, 30, 40 years, we promise a lot, but we never obligate ourselves to it. Yeah? The mutual sharing and exchange of promise and obligations, that is our covenantal life and our politics. We need to do that. And I think Dr. Ganesh would be very happy to initiate a national research on covenantal politics. What it should look like with a vision of what a good society is like. And this is, in a way, partly to preempt supposedly a constitutional consultation. But also, it's not only about the constitution. It's about building the national character of us, of Fiji. Yeah? Building the national character, that is what we need. And Dr. Ganesh, you might need to do that before our brother Johnny passes away. So, perhaps in summary of those 3 points is in reference to the main idea that I want to share with you is contribution, not necessarily numbers, is that the alphabet lesson is that everyone is given, in a given society, can potentially be literate. Yeah? And that is one of the bases of a good society, a society of equal dignity, and education is needed on that equal dignity of everyone. The second point is that an extraordinary feature of language in most indigenous societies is that their language, script and reading is of the right brain. They see the world differently. It builds a world of meaning through stories and connections. Education needs to be on meaning as well. Yeah? Research needs to be on meaning too. The third point about the 3 things is the very essence of a good society is the exchange of promise and obligations. We create worlds with our words of promise and obligations, and this is the covenant we make with each other. Education is an intergenerational conversation on the world we create with our words, and which binds us on our promise and obligation. Poetry, once upon a time, you can either be killed or not. Yeah? When oratory happens, and if your oratory fail to move, you will lose your life. Back in the history of oratory and poetry. Yeah? Today we still have oratory and poetry in traditions, in our cultures and traditions. But they no longer carry the manner of the words as they used to. Where words carry, he's the phrase, he's the man of his word, that kind of thing. Yeah? Less and less we hear of those kinds of phrases today. So those are the 3. Now we move on to the last point of context and conditions. These photos are taken from a video somebody took when he went to document the journey of these children from one village in Natasiri to another village, preschool kids. And they had to cross the Wanimala River 4 or 5 times. They take their beddings and their food stock for the week, and they go and camp in the village where the school is. And on a Friday afternoon, they journey back to their own village. And so this guy went and spent some time with him, with village people, and he walked on the Sunday afternoon, walked with them, these kids, through the tracks in the bush, and they travel along, cross the river about 4 or 5 times until they reached. And for him, his main point was that to be able to help these kids, you need to know the context and the conditions in which they live. Learning is not necessarily a classroom exercise for him, learning and sharing information is intricately a part of the relationship of walking, working, sleeping in the dorm together, and coming back home. So, context and conditions are important in research. Huh? So, basically for me, my experiences in terms of research is we are basically writing a story. From its conception of planning to the data gathering to analysis and then to writing it up, we're basically writing a story. Story that is conditioned by your worldview. The meanings in which you ascribe to the activities and the words and the stories they tell, both for explanations and to show where the facts are. Yeah. But research is never always comfortable. Genuine research is never always comfortable. Yeah. We may have a national vision that Ratu Choni and Cheram Reddy talks about. The actions and the policies may do otherwise. And our research, why it needs to be, we should never be comfortable with our research, is because researching is about a protest about something that is wrong with our society. And that's why we do research, isn't it? We don't like something because it harms whatever the moral precepts that we hold to, or whatever the constitutional vision or the moral value it indicates to us. So, genuine research should never be a comfortable exercise. Secondly, it should deal much deeper with the question, why? In any kind of research, I'm talking about social research, right? Political research and all these things. But there are three main questions that we ask ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? And how then should we live? And basically when we go into research planning and scheduling of whatever research activities, those three questions will need to be asked every time. Our position as researchers and our projection of what they think they are. Yeah? It's very important, the interaction between us as researchers and, if you like, the subjects, right? But in fact, in terms of social research, they are never subjects. We are all together in a research journey because we are telling a story. Yeah. So the role of research in civic society, as I said, is always about protest against injustice. Whatever the injustice we perceive to be. Yeah? Now, there have been a lot of discussions and arguments over the past how many years, or recently, in recent years, to do with FNPF, the previous government, right? And so there have been things written up. I know Professor Warden Nasi has put out something in terms of the analysis of that too, the FNPF. And so those kinds of things, the perception that there is an injustice being done. We do research because there is something that we need to do. We write and we do in protest of something. And we truthfully tell the story of the community. We call attention to the community's concerns and we provide different directions and options for the government of the day or for the community in which from which we get the research contract to do. I think it's very important that we recognize these things. That research is never a comfortable exercise. Now, I remember having said that years ago when Dr. Ganesh and others were doing research on poverty, it was never a comfortable exercise. The government of the day, of those times, they never accepted the figures. They challenged and they called them names. Yeah? But that is something that needs to be done because you feel that there is something wrong with our moral template and we need to do something about it. Now, much like today. Yeah? We had, 15, 16 years of silence, right? Suppressed silence, not willful silence. But nevertheless, in all those 15 years, we had prepared ourselves, hopefully, that we have talked and argued on social media about this and that. And hopefully that by now we know what to do. After 2 years of the new government, we know what to do. But apparently we don't either. We are not as individuals, as guardians of the moral template, we're not coming forward to the new government and saying, this is what we need to do. We need to rebuild our moral compass. And not only to rebuild, but to promise and obligate ourselves to that moral compass. Johnny writes a lot about the constitutional issues, and he knows what it means. But we haven't. 15 years in the desert, if you like, and yet we come out with nothing. We argue a lot on social media about this and that, and we take pot shots on people, but we haven't come up with anything. Even in the last, when that government changed in the last time, people were, those whom I know were celebrating the end of tyranny, if they like, if you want, for a better term. But we celebrate, but we didn't come up with something. One of the endearing, and I come from a Christian background, right? And one of the endearing things that have stuck with me over the years is that, I'm not sure whether some of you know the story of Moses in the Christian Bible, right? But he never reached the promised land. But he is the greatest leader that the Jews ever have. When they're about to enter the promised land, he didn't speak like who's the South African president, Nelson Mandela, talk about freedom, right, and all these things. He didn't speak to the people like any freedom fighter. Instead, he talked to them about education, because he recognized that the resilience and sustainability of his people rest on the passing on of memory. And the passing on of memory cannot be unless there is an educational process. 15 years in the doldrums, us. The Jews had 40 years in the desert. We had 15 or more. But we didn't come up with a vision of where Fiji should be. And now I think, now that perhaps by coincidence or maybe by design, that I'm obligating Dr. Ganesh, or perhaps, a good challenge, right, is to garner the support of Fiji around a research on what should a moral template for a new Fiji look like. And that, I know Dr. Kanes have influences within the government to do it, but that would go side by side with the reconciliation bill. It's all the more important and relevant too. So, just to end with this slide, that for me, in terms of social, there are two approaches to it. One is that we see context and say, what can we do to improve things? The conditions can be improved, but remain the same. The approach B is that we see the context and we say, what can we do to change things? The conditions cannot be improved unless these are changed. Two approaches to research. But it's basically, the first approach is that it's a bit like fatalism, right? Is that the conditions of poverty will not be changed. We might as well do the research, suggest areas where they can benefit from the budget, some things that they can do. Yeah. The second approach, which we do that most often today, yeah, that kind of research. We research into the gaps that are in poverty policies, budget policies, and all that stuff. The second approach is say, no, we don't accept it. We don't accept the fact that poverty cannot be changed. The conditions of it cannot be changed. We can't accept the fact that people cannot earn a wage above poverty level. They can. And so those approaches to research means therefore different ways of planning it, yeah? And different ways of implementing it, and different ways of writing a report. So two different approaches with vastly different methods and outcomes. One takes the condition as given, approach A, cannot be changed, and the other starts from the premise of negation of what is given. Yeah. Second, one focuses on data analysis and reasoning to arrive at the truth. The other, which is less often tried, strives for creativity, innovation, and the aggregation of truths. It works from the right side of the brain. Yeah. The third point is that one is about a world that is, the given, and approach B is about the cognitive dissonance. It's between the world that is and the world that ought to be. And this is where I think and I believe our researchers should be. Yeah? We live and research on the world that is right now, but we are projecting the world that ought to be. Yeah? It's an important insight to it, because research should never be dry. Yeah? It should never be just figures and data, and nobody else knows how to read it. Except for the elite few who go through the tables and say, oh, yes, this and that and that. But for the majority of us, we don't. And so research today in Fiji as elsewhere should stand in that place. The cognitive, the cognitive dissonance place. We do the research as the world is today, but we are projecting that what Fiji ought to be in the future. So, my last comment would be to say that amidst all the strifes that we have had in the past 30 years, of all the hurts and the demeaning things that have happened, both for all communities, particularly with our Hindu brothers and sisters is to do with the idea that small, empowering things makes a lot of meaning. And many of those have been done in the past, how many odd years? Yeah? Muani for example, year 2000, Fijian families sheltered some of the Indian families. Give them protection. After the coups, the founding of the Friend in Lautoka organization. The homes that cared for the elderly and the orphans over the many years. And many other stories which combined makes a contribution to what our nation should look like. Yeah? So, back to the idea, just one that I wanted to share with you, is that our strength as a nation lies in our contribution. We become disillusioned when we see numbers. We become encouraged and empowered when we see contributions being done. And over the how many years of civil unrest and political coups, we have always come back to contribute. Yeah. And that, for me, is not only an endearing character of our country and nation, but it's one of the liberating features of our lives. Yeah. When a farmer contributes a certain amount of dollars to something worthwhile, not big, but with it carries the hope of his family and him that perhaps that contribution will go to someone else that will need it. And mind you, that as human beings, right? But as human beings, we are also built to give, right? When things happen, bad things happen to our neighbors or to our own family members, we give. One of the interesting things about the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, and those who from the biblical tradition knows this, but the Dead Sea, there's nothing there. Nothing grows, right? There's no marine life. In the Galilee, Sea of Galilee is thriving with life. The strange thing is that they come from the same source, the River Jordan. And why is it? Because the Dead Sea doesn't flow out anywhere. The Sea of Galilee flows out, meaning that when it receives the River Jordan, it gives out. The Dead Sea didn't. And that's why there's no life, right? I just want to end with that story because as much as I think and I want to believe that our Constitution is not about a covenant, as much as I think and I want to believe that our Constitution and our moral template is about contribution of each one of us, I think and I believe we need to give much more value to what we contribute, yeah, than to the numbers of population that each ethnic group has. Because every time we face a difficulty in our national life, we come back and we contribute. Without it, our national life will die. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casimira. I have to confess, I did think your presentation today would be very interesting, but I'm just amazed at how I hung on every word that you gave us today. That was a truly amazing presentation. And as a researcher myself, it's made me realize that I have a long way to go to get to half of the things that you made me start to think about now. And, you know, I really particularly liked the amount of courage it took as well to say some of the things you've said, because although we've come out of this wilderness of 16 years, we are still slowly trying to find our feet to the full expression of freedom and being able to say what you want to say. You would be amazed, and I will confess that I am one of those who still hesitates sometimes before I allow myself to say exactly what I want to say. And yet with the change in government, we now should know that we can say what we feel and we have the right to do that. So I'd like to thank you as well for that aspect. Many of the things that was said today on research is deep thinking for me, and especially about the moral compass. Research should never be dry. That part I did know, of course, because otherwise you'll do your research and you'll write your paper, and then who's going to want to help you make the change if you're going to bore the living hell out of them when you make the presentation, you know? So you've got to do that research, and you've got to come up with what the vision is you see at the end that you're trying to achieve. And for me, that's been gender, as most of my colleagues will know. You know, how do you make them, how do you convince them as to what it is you're trying to say when you're doing your research? So for me, that's been my current one. So a lot of that has been applicable for me. And as we all know right now, the topical issue is the Constitution. So there's a lot of, you know, there may even be some questions along that aspect. But Mr. Casimira, that was truly amazing. So before we take questions and answers, I would like us to please all put our hands together for a wonderful presentation. And where is Rajesh for the mic? Mr. Casimira, I apologize, but you're now going to have questions and answers, so I think it may be easier if you come back up here, sir. And Rajesh, please put your hand up if you have a question, and Rajesh will bring the mic.
Naka, Obi Mbolavunaka, I've finally get to meet you after, I think, close to 40 years from St. John's.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I'm retired, by the way, from the civil service, particularly with law enforcement. This is something, just like Annie said, struck me about what Maobi has presented to us today. He's talking about a constitution, and we all know this has gathered momentum in the last couple of weeks and days. So for me, the question that has always struck me, and for me here, being here, is I seem to be on hallowed ground with all the academics that are here. This is from a layman's term, I'm asking this question. I've always asked this question on the grog bowl, in the villages, wherever I go. I've asked this pressing question. Will having another constitution resolve our issues? Meaning, does parliamentary democracy suit us? That is the question I'm asking. And I made every effort to come today, because I know there'll be a lot of brains here to answer that question. You know, if a good doctor has come, a professor, I think, and told us that we need to do this to get away, take away the Constitution. I have asked that question. Okay, if you take away 2013 Constitution, what will we bring back? Some people say 1997 Constitution, some say this and that. That's fine. But will it take away the mistrust, Will it take away the very issues that we are dealing with? I'm indigenous. 75% of my people are living in poverty. And yet we own, like what, 90% they say, of the land. All land. To me, it doesn't correlate. It doesn't, something wrong somewhere. So, Obi, I'll be very glad if you could, I think, research into that. Is parliamentary democracy still good enough for us, or do we have to come up with something, I don't know, that takes into consideration all the races over there? I mean, before I went to St. John, I went to school, predominantly Indian school. So for me, and being Catholic, there's always that sense of fair play, I always say. We see things differently. That's how I see myself. So, as an indigenous, I can say, okay, we need to protect the rights of the indigenous. But how about the 30-something%? I mean, I have family who are married to Indian, Chinese, you name it. How do we reflect that in whatever? And then we're talking about, I wrote, I was taken up, I'm an ex-police officer, but I was taken up to be questioned why I wrote on that section, 1312, about the role of the military. At least I don't hold any grudge against anybody. But that's what I'm saying. In layman's terms, that section to me says that the military can basically just step in. But the good professor said a couple of days ago, no. So, but I say that needs to be taken to the courts. So it goes back to what I'm saying. We're having another constitution. Resolve our issues, whether it's political, social, or whatever. Nobody will be.
Well, now, it's open to anybody who wants to have an opinion on it, because it's a question for all of us. There is and most often you'll find this principle in indigenous knowledge, or in traditions, the principle of mutual contradiction, as opposed to Plato's logic, where one has to die, the other has to live, right? So in terms of where indigenous knowledge, but I'm pretty sure Ganesh, way back then, has indigenous knowledge then. Yeah? I don't know where he is now. But that principle applies, that two opposing sides are equally valid in their views. That it's something like the moon gives way to the sun every morning, and the sun gives way to the moon every day. Yeah, it works along that principle. But the two things exist together. Now, if we are going to say, okay, let's look at how that principle is applicable to our political system. How can we arrange our parliamentary system in such a way that accountability of policies is equally held dearly as with cooperation with one another? You see, the problem we had in the past couple of months is that suddenly one party, the Fiji First, has gone. Yeah? And people are jumping up and down because there's no opposition, they say. But if we are going to, if we are bold enough and courageous enough to say, okay, forget about previous constitutions, let's design something new. And let's look at our our values and our systems that are in place, both in terms of our cultures and traditions and religions, and say, let's design something new. We keep those principles of consultations, of contribution, of accountability in place, but the systems to do that are things that we agree among ourselves to do. Is that possible? Is that possible? Yes. But you need, I mean, in terms of what Malcolm Chadwell wrote about, you know what he wrote, The Tipping Point? You know, the book that he wrote about the tipping point. He says, for any idea to propagate, you will need influential people. And I'm saying that because Dr. Ganesh is here. He's one of those. To move it forward and say, let's be bold enough in this new Fiji to construct something that every one of us can agree on. Yeah?
Sorry, if I may just comment to that. My view, this is not coming from Pacific Polytech, this is my personal view, is, you know, the question is, do we want a new constitution? My view is, did we have one that consulted with us? Did we feel we had input to it? Or was it, as they say, a two-man thing? You know, and if we are going to progress, then it needs, and if we do, I'm of the view that, you know, we should have some group of the civil society, religious organizations, etc., forming a group that's going to look at what parts of the Constitution can be in a broad way kept and what parts need to be changed, and then have proper consultation out there. You know, and that would be something lovely if Pacific Polytech could lead it, but I'm just suggesting that. Or even be a part of this group that would do that. Because I certainly didn't feel consulted at all in any way, neither did any of my circle of friends, and I have a large circle. None of them felt consulted in any way, and yet we were told that there was extensive consultations held in forming that constitution. So my view is, you know, we've had, what is it, they said in the last presentation, 4 or 5. We're resilient, as you mentioned, Mr. Casimira. You know, after bad times, we come out and we're resilient, we bounce back, we do research and try to help the economy move forward. So if that's the case, after 16 years of the wilderness, then we should be really eager to go in making something work. So I do feel that this is the time, if ever, for us to come up with ideas and support a change, because we had one, and please excuse me for those words, but I feel very passionate about it. I feel that we had one that was pretty much rammed down our throats, and this is yours. This is your constitution. So for me, well, I'll just leave that as a big question mark. Thank you. That was just my comment.
Thanks for the presentation. Your sarcasm is to another level, though. Okay, my question is, how can we use research topics to remove the racial discrimination the Constitution has created? The first coup was due to allowing a non-Indigenous participation, and then the coup that Dr. Ganesh was in, the first Indigenous PM of Fiji. So memories, like you mentioned, shape the future plans, but memories of us in 2000 coup and what my mother has, she has to date not accepted the forgiveness, and that trauma keeps on sort of like pass on to us. So I would say that the need for why research will help us bring about the reconciliation bill, and how the Constitution, though the new Constitution is much needed through consulting and participatory, but the process to create the awareness change the constitution will bring about reconciliation and unity amongst the community and the racial discrimination that it has created, I think research can help into that. Thank you.
Yeah, research definitely has a role to play. And you might want to think about whether you do a rural analytical research, or you do a monograph research, or you do a story research. For most indigenous and common urban rural people, it's the simplicity of the information that is most important. And to the medium of which that information is passed on, mostly through stories. Yeah? So definitely in terms of research, that can help. The stories of the drama of those years. And it's not just recording a third person kind of story, it's the person that tells the story as it was, as it happened to him or her. How can that be done? In terms of research, because then that research becomes a liberative research. Because you're not dealing with not only the drama and the data and the facts, but you're dealing with a relationship that has been damaged. And through that medium, healing, which you might hope will happen, is part of that process. Whatever happened to your mom, right? And of course, Dr. Ganesh, who had how many months in Parliament? Yeah? Yeah. So, the drama of those times is a living memory. One of the things that when in World War II, when the Jews were in the concentration camps, and who's this famous psychologist who started the behavioral psychology? I forgot his name right now. He was alive at that time, and he was one of those who were imprisoned at the camp. But then he said that all freedoms can be taken away except for one, and that's the freedom of choice. You can never take away our freedom of choice in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. He came out from the camp, and he started this branch of psychology that give birth to what is called now reframing. Yeah? Reframing your memory, and is used mostly by psychology to heal trauma. That methodology of psychology. Yeah? But the thing is, the insight is this, that whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, that freedom of choice can never be taken away. And for your mom, the choice to remain in that trauma can never be taken away unless there's a story told about it. How can research help? I think the simpler, in the story form, would be much more effective than an 800-page volume of research. Yeah, Dr. Ganesh?
Ma'am, before we finish, can I just contribute as well? Thank you, ma'am. Vinavalivu, sir, gentlemen, I just heard your beautiful presentation. A part of it where you spoke about cognitive dissonance, and then the gentleman in the corner there who mentioned whether we should have a change in constitution. It all boils down to the will of the people. When we are talking about cognitive dissonance, we are talking about their beliefs and their actions, whether it goes along. It is a matter whether the right hand recognizes the left hand. So it's the will of the people with leadership at the hems of political situation in the South Pacific. So the people's mindset from the leader towards the grassroots people must change. Then only you can change. Thank you.
One comment. No, I just, this phrase has been one of the inspiring phrases that I've ever heard, but it's overused now. You know that phrase, we the people? It's actually an American constitutional phrase. And it came from the American culture of that democracy. But it has been used and overused now, and it becomes less meaningless. It becomes less meaningful. But the point remains that the custodianship of law, our moral template, is us, not the state, not the state or the market or the law or the military or the police. It's us. And if you want to make this nation move forward, you and I have to do something about it. Yeah? There is grounds for feeling that we will not get anywhere because our disagreements have been deep-seated for many years. But there are grounds to say that it's not a disillusionment. And I read the chapter that the book launched recently by the chapter of Mrs. Waiwalu sitting at the back. And she talked about naming in the Itoke tradition. You know what is liberating about that chapter? If you have time to read it. But what is liberating about that chapter is because my son is linked to me, my daughter is linked to me, I'm linked to my grandfather and my father and those gone before me. The insight is this: if we begin to look at ourselves through that kind of prism, that we are linked to each other because we are first and foremost human, then anything is possible. Naming has a liberating element to it. And we name our dramas because we know that our drama is also the other person's drama. And when we understand that our dramas link together, we begin to believe that there is ground for us to live together much more liberatively. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I would now like to invite the director, Mr. Penny Taoi, to please come and give the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's not about figures, but it's more into contribution. As a director of Pacific Polytech, I look at figures. One thing is that when I look at my number of graduates, I feel very, very happy when I see figures, because figures is facts. I'm not, but however, today when I sitting down, when Mr. Aisake said, talk about contribution, that triggers me to think more about that. To me, contribution for you not to give, it's about faith. Facts through figures, contribution is through faith. That is what I dwell in. And that, I feel, is a success. On behalf of Pacific Polytech, the council member, plus the management team, I'm honored to extend our deepest gratitude to Mr. Aisake for his enlightened and thoughtful, provoking presentation on the role in civil society and national development. Mr. Casimira, your extensive work with the communities of Fiji and your tireless efforts in addressing social justice issues across Fiji and the Pacific have made a profound impact. Your expertise in the field of social justice issue research is truly inspiring, and your insight today have shed light on the crucial role that research plays in fostering civil society and driving national development. Your dedication to the cause of social justice, coupled with your deep understanding of the challenge and opportunities within our communities, has provided us with invaluable knowledge. In addition, we would like not to express our heartfelt thanks to the staff at Pacific Polytech for their hard work and dedication in organizing this event. Staff, your efforts behind the scenes have ensured that everything ran smoothly, and we deeply appreciate your commitment and professionalism. A special thank goes to the chair of the council and its secretariat. Your leadership and meticulous planning have been vital in putting together this outstanding program. Your vision and attention to details have made this event resounding success. Once again, thank you, Mr. Casimira, for your outstanding presentation and for your unwavering dedication to the betterment of our society. We look forward to continuing to learn from your experience and insight, and we strive to create a more just and equitable world. Thank you, sir.